We're Nick Lombardino and Zach Blumenfeld, co-founders of CultureCon. Welcome to a special series on the CultureCon podcast, Culture Starts Here.
This content series is brought to you in partnership with our friends at ADVISA, a Midwest-based consultancy helping CEOs, HR leaders, and managers transform workplace culture.
In each episode, ADVISA CEO Heather Haas and leadership consultant BJ McKay dive into practical ways to initiate and sustain the culture you need to drive growth and success at your organization.
The Culture Starts Here series starts now.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Culture Starts Here on the CultureCon podcast. I'm BJ McKay, leadership consultant with ADVISA, and I'm here with my co-host, ADVISA CEO, Heather Haas. Heather, how are you?
I'm well. Great to be here.
Wonderful. Today we have a special guest joining us. Todd, you're special, man.
Oh,
we're glad you're here.
Thanks.
This is Todd Wuestenberg, and he's the Chief Culture Officer at Haverkamp Properties, and we're super excited that he joined us to probably break up the monotony for some people of listening to Heather and BJ talk to each other.
Well, I appreciate the invite, and thanks for this opportunity, you two.
You're welcome. Well, we got to meet you recently in person at CultureCon in Madison, and we had a chance to rap a little bit. You were my elbow partner at one of our tables, which was great. And I'm excited to talk to you, and I'm sure Heather is as well, about culture and the role that leaders play in culture, which is a huge aspect of what drives it or what torpedoes a culture. But before we do, some people might be listening. We don't know who Todd is. So if you do us the favor of telling us a little bit about yourself as well as the listeners.
Absolutely. So I am a born and raised Iowan, and I'm an Iowa State graduate. Go Tyrese Halliburton and the Indiana Pacers.
Yes, indeed.
Yes. My wife and I actually met at Iowa State University, and we've been married for 34 years. We have 4 children. 2 are married, and now 2 are engaged because our daughter got engaged Friday night. So that's
congrats.
Congratulations.
That's very exciting.
Thank you. I had to make my future son-in-law sweat a little bit. I didn't give him the yep right away when he asked, but I digress. We also have our first grandchild on the way. So those are some of the personal things. But professionally, I have been in the real estate multifamily industry for over 30 years. I've been with Haverkamp Properties for a little over 20 years. And most of my tenure with Haverkamp Properties was in the seat of Chief Operations Officer. But 3 years ago, I moved over to this seat that you introduced me as the Chief Culture Officer, and we'll talk more about that, I'm sure. But as far as Haverkamp itself, we've been in business for over 31 years. Our corporate office is here in Ames, Iowa, but we have 13 other offices throughout the state of Iowa, and we're getting ready to expand outside of our borders. The owner, Brent Haverkamp, he and I actually met each other at the campus of Iowa State University when we were both students there. And Brent was actually a graduate in computer science, but he had a passion for real estate, just an avid reader. And shortly after he and his wife bought their first house in the campus town area here in Ames, they bought a rental house right across the street. So the over 5,000 units we have in our portfolio today started with just one rental house. And so that's a testament. Wow. One of our core values, hard work. That was one that Brent, and we'll talk about how we came up with our core values a little bit later, but that was one of the core values Brent said had to be an absolute hard work. And he demonstrated that by going from that 1 to the 5,000 we're at today. We are now a vertically integrated company. So Haverkamp Group, sometimes call that the mothership. Haverkamp Group is now made up of Haverkamp Properties, and we have Haverkamp Construction, we have Haverkamp Investment. So vertically integrated from all the way from investments to design, development, construction, property management, asset management.
Wow, what a ride. And you being there from the beginning and having a couple different roles, starting out in operations, now in the culture seat. Given that culture is really the topic of our conversation, tell us a little bit about when did you first start to realize that you had an affinity for culture and that this was something that was important to you and something that you were drawn to?
Yeah, I want to take a step back and I want to define culture for a moment. Culture actually comes from the Latin word cultus, which means to care for. So with that definition in mind, to care for, I think culture really began to become important to me actually in my junior high years as I started getting involved in athletics. It became very clear that the teams that really cared for one another, cared about how they showed up, what they did, how they represented their families, how they represented their community, became very important. So in those early days, that's, became very clear that, the culture was really, really important. I actually started off my career as a teacher and a coach. So I always cared about the team. Like I said, cared about how we did things, cared about how we showed up. But the real epiphany for me happened in 2015. Like I said, I was in the seat of chief operations officer at that time, and I just had finished reading a book actually called The 31 Practices, Release the Power of Your Organization Values Every Day. So after reading that book, it prompted me to want to sit down with Brent and say, hey, let's talk about our values. Let's really get intentional about defining what our culture is, and it's going to start with values. So he and I went through this exercise with several key employees, and we went back and forth, and eventually we came up with our core values and our mission statement. So it was 2015 that really began to take off, where we became more and more intentional about culture.
I love that. And I mean, that's music to our ears, because we also believe that your values are sort of where it all begins and ends in terms of culture. And coincidentally, you're in good company, because as you may know, I think I shared with you at CultureCon, I'm a former teacher and coach, and BJ has also done a lot of coaching. So I wonder if there is something in that there's something about helping people reach their potential that is, and as you said, to care for people, that's very much in our DNA as people who work in the space.
Well, Todd, a couple questions. And I'd love to hear, when would the organization start again? Refresh my memory.
So we've been in business for now 31 years.
So what happened? You read that book, and you probably read a lot of books. But whatever happened, what was going on in 2015 with the organization that made that moment happen outside of reading that book? There must have been something else in that cocktail that made that conversation kind of come to a head.
Absolutely. That's when we really started to have conversations about growth. What does the future look like? What is the direction we want to go as an organization? And so with that also in mind, it's like, okay, well, we need to know what our North Star is. Okay, we want to grow. Actually, our owner began to get a vision of growing by 10 times. Okay, so this is all great. And we're all, we're in business. We like numbers. We like data, all those type of things. But what is going to be that North Star? What is going to be that roadmap that will help us get there? And what role, and culture, we believe, plays a very, very important part in that, because that's what we believe is our secret sauce, is our culture. So it was the idea of growth in mind that actually started that conversation, BJ.
I love it. I love the fact that it was a business imperative that drummed that up, that we have to do something different in there. And people have so many different perceptions of culture and what it actually means. To help folks get their arms around culture, we actually created a framework. We'll probably weave through it a little bit today that we've been using on this series. And it's probably time we do just a quick recap for those listening. And for Todd, there'll be a test at the end, Todd. So just kind of pay attention, take your notes. I want to see your pen, your clicker here. And Heather typically has teed up Atlas in the last few episodes, but do you mind if I give it a shot this time, Heather?
Go for it, VJ.
All right, I'll try to keep it brief. So Atlas is an acronym for 5 drivers of cultural competitive advantage. So number 1 is activation from above. Already with what Todd shared, he met with Brent, the person who runs the organization. So if the individual's in the top on body, it's rare that anyone else is. Trust and shared purpose, which is employees are committed to the bigger picture. And they also trust those leaders at above. They trust that they're going to do what they said they're going to do. Connecting that back to behavior, the L is leader effectiveness. So your leaders are capable and confident. And there's programs in there to not only define effectiveness, but to help develop it in individuals. A is actionable people data. This is data used to understand employees' motivations, needs, and experiences. And as Todd shared earlier about growth typically does mean growth in headcount at some point. How do we scale out those leaders? How do when we're going to other states and we're expanding even beyond borders, how do we maintain the specialness that really makes us what we are? And actionable people data ties into that. And the last S is systems that support leaders. So thinking about people, you have the tools, processes, and policies in place to actually help your leaders. So gosh, at minimum, at least it's not inertia. We have to work through them to do the right thing, which can happen at times for best intent. But that is Atlas. And I don't know, Heather, if you can grab the baton back, if there's any color that you might add to that.
That was a great summary. I mean, just to recap, the reason that we talk in terms of a framework, and I know you know this because you built yours from the ground up as well, but it's helpful to have a way to talk about something that is kind of as hard to get your arms around as culture. So a framework gives us a language, a framework gives us some criteria for prioritization and decision making, for understanding trade-offs, etc. So I think that's a great way to set the table. And I don't know, Todd, maybe you want to kind of comment on, that's our point of view on culture. Thoughts on how we've kind of codified that and put it out into the world.
Absolutely. First of all, I love the acronym. I'm all about acronyms. Behind my shoulder, it might be hard to see, but we have a little icon there, avatar. That is Sherry. Sherry is our core values: service, hard work, accountability, results driven, and integrity. So we have personified our core values in using an acronym. So I'm all about acronyms and love the Atlas. Those 5 points that you made, spot on. And if you had to force me into a corner and say, hey, Todd, pick one of those that you think is like the one you really want to hang your hat on, it's the leadership one, no question. Leadership is so valuable. I mean, you said it a little bit ago there, BJ, it has to start from the top. You got to get that buy-in from the leadership, but it's more than that. Also, it's about that leadership development. And we really think it's important. If you're going to maintain your strong culture, you've got to invest in that next generation of leaders. So actually in 2018, we started our own leadership and training program, LIT for short. And we did that with, again, growth in mind. Okay, how are we going to scale? Well, we got to grow leaders. Okay, well, what kind of leaders do we want? So we began to develop that on our own. And today, we've had we've had our lowest number has been 5 in that group, and it's a year-long process. It starts off actually with our leadership team looking across the horizon, looking at our team and saying, who are the emerging leaders? And we nominate them. And then we tell them, hey, you've been nominated or maybe voluntold. That might be really good for your career if you participate in this year-long program. But it has 3 main tenets. One is we want them to develop self-awareness. Somebody once said the hardest person you're going to lead is yourself. So self-awareness.
Yep.
Awareness is very, very critical. The second thing is having a learning mindset. You talked about reading there, BJ. We believe a lot in reading or listening to podcasts, maybe to make it a little bit more modern. But there's something about, just exposing yourself to more ideas and learning from others. And then the third one, and this is what we think is the most critical one, we call it micro-mentoring. We provide opportunities for those emerging leaders to spend time with all of our current leaders so they can get some proximity and closeness to our current leaders.
Wow. And a couple of questions I have for the folks listening. I mean, you brought up some things that are pretty dialed in, it sounds like. I mean, these 3 things, and it's LIT for short, and leadership and training, it sounds like it's like polished up now. You know what it is, and you probably know what it produces. Let's say I'm listening to this right now with my organization. I might be in a similar seat to you, Todd, or just sitting on the executive team. We've talked about doing leadership development. We've agreed there's awareness that we need to do something, but it seems like it's like an ocean of options. Like you have 3 key, it sounds like, gosh, which ones are our tenets? So I'd love to hear at any point, even in the weeds, like how you came to that. How did it start? What was that genesis story?
Oh, yeah, great. I want to talk about culture for a moment, and specifically thriving culture, because every organization has a culture. We all know that. The question is it a thriving culture or is it a surviving culture? We see the data out there that, only 1/3 of the employees are engaged at their workplace. So only 1/3, I would say, are in a thriving culture. The other 2/3 are just surviving. So as we think about culture and we think about the things that make up culture, yes, there's definitely the purpose. In fact, we have a little formula. It's TC for thriving culture, and then it's purpose plus persistence plus planting. So the purpose is, we talked about the intentionality, The persistence is, working hard at it and diligently, but it's not only working hard, but working smart. And then I'm going to go back to that planting side of things, the leadership. So, there's this big ocean, like you talked about, to choose from. But you've got to have purpose. You've got to have the persistence, and you got to have that planting of the next generation of leaders. To be honest, it was a little bit of trial and error. BJ, what it looked like in 2018, it looks a lot different today, but it's also through that feedback mechanism, so after we get done with the year, hey, give us some feedback, those who graduated, and we would always celebrate the graduations, in front of the entire organization, make much of it, so now people are like, I want to be a part of that. I hope I'm asked to be a part of that leadership and training. And so when we get that feedback over the years, we found these are the three things that really people hang on to. And if I had to pick one of those three, it's again, that micro mentorship. Get those future leaders connected with today's leaders so they know, how they think, why they do the things they do. Why do we believe these things? And when there's that proximity, BJ, you and I talked about this as parents, when we were at CultureCon, we believe, more things are going to be caught than taught. So we can talk all we want and say all the things we want, but if they see it lived out in us, that's what they're going to live out then.
I love it. I love how you talked about that also feedback. Like we got through the first iteration and that wasn't the iteration. That wasn't the way we did it. So I'd love you to do two quick things here. And I'm going to pass the baton back to Heather in a second for a few questions she has. Is place Heather and I as emerging leaders at Haverkamp Properties in that first cohort, that first group. What was our experience like? And then bookend it with if we were in last year's. Like talk us through how that experience would look.
Okay. 2018, there's a quote, and I don't know who to give credit to, but we use this as in so much in what we do. And that is this, that methods are many, principles are few, methods always change, and principles never do. So we said, okay, what are the key things for principles of leadership that we want? I already talked about since day one. So the one thing that has not changed throughout that time period is getting those emerging leaders with our current leaders. And how that's changed is it used to be a one-on-one meeting where we just say, okay, you're going to schedule 90 minutes to talk to that current leader, and you're going to come up with your own set of questions. You're going to drive that. And how that's morphed today is we now send them in by twos because it's less intimidating. The feedback we got that first year, hey, that's really, I'm now sitting down with the owner and the president of this company and interviewing them.
It's a little scary, right?
This is scary,
Yeah.
So we send them in, in groups of two now. Some of that is also for efficiency purposes, to be honest with you, because I think our largest group now has been 15 that we've had in a year in that group. So some of it has come with efficiency. So that was one lesson learned. One thing, though, that our leaders like about that time period is they are happy that it's not a scripted bunch of questions. They get to see the personality and what's important to that emerging leader that they want to talk about. And that's what we say, hey, what's important to you? You're going to have this 90 minutes with this executive. What do you want to learn? You drive that. So we don't have any rubric or any set of questions. So that's one thing that is consistent, but the one thing is, they're now doing it in pairs. We dialed back actually a little bit on the reading. We had more outside readings we asked them to do beginning, and that was a little bit of too much of a heavy lift. So now we say, hey, we got 3 books that we want you to read throughout this course of time. And then they do a little, I'll say, book report. Again, there's no rubric, no expectation, just tell us what you learned. And so that's one thing that's changed. The books have always been the same because, again, that principle of, hey, leaders need to always be learning and growing. So that principle stayed. The method has changed there as well. The other principle, again, that going back to that tenet is, making sure that they know themselves. So we always have gone with the DISC assessment since day one, but now we've grown in our understanding of how to talk about the DISC assessment. So the principles have always remained the same and the things that we define, but how the methods are done is what's changed. So if I was talking to you, I would say, find out what those principles are that you believe are really important. And then, that'll change over time.
So
Thank
good.
you, Todd.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for lingering on like leader effectiveness and how that layer like mapped in your organization and taking us to the past and bringing us to the future. So we're going to unpack a little bit more of the culture work you've been doing. So Heather, I'll pass the baton to you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think some of the people who may be watching and listening, they're intellectually bought in. They are, picking up everything you're putting down. But sometimes the question is, it's so hard to actually get some momentum. And there are often some real barriers in the way to getting that executive team bought in and making the investments. So talk a little bit about, have you ever had any false starts? Has there been any inertia? I mean, because what you have going now is, the gold star that every organization would strive for. But talk about the hard part of getting that going.
Yeah, I mean, it does start with getting that leadership buy-in. And so you have to know what is the value that you're going to bring, to the organization. Why should there be an investment? And that's, some of the kind of pushback. Hey, is this an investment or is this just another expense? No, you have to help them understand this is actually an investment in the future, especially as we talk about growing and, we want sustainability. This is our secret sauce. How do we keep reproducing this? And so some of that is going to be data driven. And so I knew that was something key for our leadership, is to make sure that they understood the data. And we've all seen the data out there in terms of what it costs companies when there's high employee turnover. When culture is not great and people are just surviving, like I said, they're not thriving, they're not going to stay there very long. And then you're constantly turning over. Well, that comes at a real cost, dollars and cents.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when you bring that to leadership and say, hey, here's the data and here's where we're at. Yeah, at the time, I'm pretty confident of this, that we were either right at or even not performing as well as our industry standard as far as turnover. So the first thing, okay, if we can just dial back on our turnover and reduce it by a certain percentage, it's going to pay off, So coming at with the data and helping them understand that, culture is part of the business strategy. I've said this before, that culture is that soil in which your business strategy grows in. And I think others have said that as well. It's nothing original. So you got to get the leadership buy-in, and you have to know, the language. You got to know what's important. Because, we've all heard it too. What's the ROI on culture? How can you really measure it? I think you can measure it to a certain degree, and that's going back to that second P I talked about in our formula, is you have to have smart data.
That's right.
I have to admit that we actually violated one of our core values for a while, and that was results driven. So we always felt that we had good culture, but we never had any data to support it. So one of the first initiatives we did as I took on this new role is we started asking our employees, what do you think about the culture here? Does it line up with what we think it is? Because what's more important is, what do you think it is? So, that's another thing. You have to understand and ask those tough questions. Do you like working here? And there are so many different resources out there to be able to get that information, get that feedback. And then the third part is, then you just got to be committed to it. When you get that data back for us, okay, where are our gaps? Okay, we say we want to be here, but this is what our employees are saying. What can we do to lessen those gaps? And then those places that we're doing well in, okay, that's great. But one thing we know about culture, guys, is it is dynamic. It is
absolutely
not static. It is always changing. So what can we do? Even though we're doing well, how can we still make some incremental changes?
That's why I love that you mentioned the measurement piece. It's a brave thing to try to measure your culture and ask employees for their perspective, because as soon as you ask, now you have to do something with it. You have to wrestle with it. But to your point, as the world is always changing, the experience that employees have within the world of work is always changing. So I love that you similarly, we call it actionable people data, and you're talking about measurement as well.
It sounds like too, there's all these things I hear leadership talking about as I go to executive meetings. It's trying not to tackle all of them at once. Sounds like you pinned on, like, let's pick turnover. Let's start with something we can navigate to, and let's do something for that. Let's pin that as maybe the key data point versus trying to go too broad too soon, where we might not be able to connect like what we're doing to this result that we said we would move. For maybe in your case, you maybe didn't have that, but for others, for maybe a stubborn executive team, that CFO that's like, hey, times are tough. Or, the COO is like, we have too many acquisitions going on. Like, that's the kind of elixir that folks are running into. So for listeners who want to develop culture, the right culture in their organizations, Todd, like they're tuning in, that's probably who we're talking to right now, but might be navigating some hurdles along the way. What advice would you give them?
Again, be persistent in a good way. keep making sure that you are the culture champion. You can start with the data, but you have to, first of all, demonstrate it yourself, and you have to get that leadership buy-in. That is so, so critical.
Well, I mean, related to that persistence and sort of the main focus of this episode is leader effectiveness. I think when we talk about leaders being effective at creating that competitive advantage, their effectiveness comes down to two things. It's, do they know what to say and do to be effective? So have we clarified specifically, this is what good leadership looks like at Haverkamp? And then the second piece is the explicit definition of core values that are related to your business aims. So with those two things in mind, tell us a little bit about how you've defined good leadership and what are your core values, because you've already expressed that they're so critical. You even have the Sherry behind you. So what are they all, so that we can also kind of listen and be inspired by how you talk about those?
Again, this has been an evolution and process. So what we have today, and this would be my encouragement, is try to get your culture on paper. And this is what I mean. This is our culture on paper. It's a one sheet. It's got our core values. It's got our purpose statement. And then it's got our 3 uniques. And what that does, and you talked about this earlier, that creates that common language. All right, this is what we talk about, core values. Part of our onboarding process, and I have to admit too, back in 2015 when we started, our onboarding process was horrible. It was the classic, hey, thanks for being here. Here's your computer. Why don't you watch these videos? I'll check back with you in 2 hours. It was horrible. Today, what that has evolved to is that we are very purposeful, intentional. We sit down with every new employee. We actually sit down. We'll bring 3 or 4 of them in as a group, because what we've learned is there's a little bit of, they look around the room and they're like, oh, I'm not the only one. Okay.
Yeah.
And so
then peer pressure is helpful.
Yeah. So we said, here's our core values. And so we tell them, well, this is what it looks like to live out the core value of service. And this is, a story of why it's so important. So we walk through those so they begin to see those things. And it gets them, all right away, gets them initiated to, this is who we are. This is how we do things around here. So I would say, get your culture on paper, work hard to get it in a 1-page, easily digestible and repeatable document.
Can I linger on that a little bit too? If we go backwards in time, I know I keep taking you back in time. The culture is great there. You have it dialed in, but you talk about like the culture that you want. That stuff on the paper had to come from somewhere. So whether it's like values, purpose, norms, actions, any of those things, what was the process of that? Like, how many meetings did it take? Did you bring somebody in? Did somebody lead it? Like, take us through the steps as you can remember them of how that came to be.
Yeah. Thank you, BJ. I'm getting older. It's getting harder for me to remember. So I'm glad you keep asking me things. So then, it comes to mind. So what it looked like was, okay, Brent, what are the values that are important to you? I already mentioned, hey, hard work's going to be a non-negotiable. One of our core values is going to be hard work. He says, Todd, and I tell this to everybody during that orientation, he says, Todd, I don't want people in our organization who have an attitude of that's not in my job description. All right. So we're going to put that in there as a core value, that we're going to help each other out. We're not going to hide from hard things, and we're going to help we're going to have this mindset of, doing and going above and beyond. Okay. So he came up with his list. I said, Brent, who would be your model employees? So he gave me a list of like 5 or 6 current model employees. I said, okay. So I brought those 5 or 6 employees in. We sat down. Okay. What do you think are core values here? And so they came up with their list, and, we went back and forth, and I don't know, it's probably like 6 months of this kind of just going back and forth. I mean, we didn't push it real hard, because obviously we have jobs to do and those type of things. We didn't want it to be too much of a distraction, but we spent some time and purposeful, and eventually we came up with, okay, here's our core values. And then, okay, we did the same thing with our purpose and mission statement. And again, it looks different today than what it looked like back then. We actually have changed some of our core values. And I think it's okay to change core values. Some people say, those should be the anchor. Well, you change as an organization, things happen, and some things become more priorities. And we talk about, our 5 core values. We're not saying, Sherry's more important than Atlas, or, those values are more important than another value. We're just saying these are the most priority to us right now. So they could change over time. Our first mission statement was really good, but it was really long. We made a mistake of it was a big long paragraph. I mean, we crafted this, we got everybody's input, but nobody could remember it. So, okay, so roll out, here's our core values, here our mission statement, and then we would do these little check-ins. And one of the things that came through that check-in is like, hey, could you tell us what our mission statement is? No, because it's way too long. And I even struggled with it. So we said, okay, we got to go back to the drawing board. And through another process, we had heard that a mission statement should be no more than 7 words or less. All right. So we took that paragraph and we whittled it down to 7 words. And now everybody can repeat it. So at Haverkamp Properties, we create communities where people love to live, and everybody just knows that. It just rolls off. So we didn't bring anybody in from the outside. It was clumsy. We did some reading. What are some best practices? What are some ways to do it? It was clumsy, maybe inefficient in maybe some regards, but yeah, it was fun.
Sometimes the best things are authentically born. And that's what I was hearing as you were describing that story. It started with a conversation with Brent. And that's that activation from above, right? I mean, his DNA or his thumbprint, it had to be on these values in a very meaningful way as the person who's setting the vision, the person who founded the company. And your role as the chief culture officer, you were just trying to bring this into life and kind of get everybody aligned to it and fine tune it. So that's it's great to hear how you came to that. What about, did you put any definition to leader capabilities or define specifically, here's the role that leaders need to play as culture carriers in the organization to bring all this to life?
We try to keep things real simple, Heather. And we're just like, who are the ones that are doing a really good job of living out our core values? Who is we have a phrase, who's letting their sherry shine? Definitely, you have to be in a position of, where you're giving leadership to somebody. So even if you just have one, person that's a direct report, you're in a leadership role. So we look for those people who are in those positions or maybe emerging into those positions. Maybe they're in an assistant role right now, but we see some things in them like, oh, they show some potential. We want to groom this person from this assistant role into maybe being that from assistant property manager to being the property manager. So it really boils down to who is doing a great job of living out those core values. And that's the lens in which we look through to make that decision.
Thanks, Todd. Well, you talked about growing up in rural Iowa, and you shared a little analogy with us in advance about the powerful picture of intentionality and culture based on what you observed in agriculture. I'd love for you to share that with the folks listening right now as a close for us.
Yeah. Iowa's it's a flyover state. We get it, but we're proud of our agriculture and we're corn farmers. All right. We're known for corn. So when you look at a farmer, they don't just scatter out their seeds and hope for the best. They're very intentional. There's a lot of planning that goes into it, preparation and care. There's monitoring. They're trying to protect their crop to make sure it's going to be its best. And so we want to approach organizational culture the same way. Again, it's going to require some planning. It's going to require us, being very intentional, consistent in our effort. It's not just scattering the seeds and hoping for the best. So, for a farmer, how they know whether they had a good planting season and, growing season is at the end when they actually have the harvest and they can say, oh, yeah, the work that we put in paid off. We have record number of bushels per acre, those type of things. And so it's the same in for a company. We think that culture can be a reflection of that intentional cultivation into the business strategy and look at those results.
I love it. And when we're in there doing this work, that analogy brings me to a point where some people think culture is like you show them something in a session or somewhere else. It's like they plant a seed and everyone's standing around staring at it. All right. So where's the corn? Like, where's it at? I'm like, we got to wait. How long? Like, we got to nurture it. We got to do all this, but I still don't see anything. But I still don't see anything. But I still don't see anything.
Yeah, it's that, day in, day out, absolutely, it's fun to be here in Iowa, I believe, during the growing season, and you just see the fruit of the labor, and we're getting ready to get into the harvest season. So yeah, it doesn't happen day one. There's a lot of time and effort and energy, and it takes that persistence.
Yeah. And I would just underscore, it's so worthwhile. We know from the data that, leader quality ratings are the lowest they've been in 10 years. we've got to raise that bar. We also know that high potential employees are 2.4 times more likely to stay at companies that provide development experiences. You're ticking that box as well. So back to why is this important on the business driver front? It's about getting to that 10x growth. It's about reducing turnover. And I also want to underscore, you talk so much about those emerging leaders and the micro mentoring. And that's so critical because 3 years tends to be the tipping point for when, valuable first-time leaders, younger leaders consider whether they want to stay or go. So, just taking your very specific lived experience and wrapping it with what we see in the literature and the research, I think is, it just gives so much gravity to what you're sharing with people and how you've done it. So thank you.
Can I add one more thing? We talked about that initial leadership and training. Well, what happens after they graduate? Okay, so we want to continue to invest in those leaders. So actually, we start to use outside source. All right, so we look for third parties who have an alignment. We vet them, and then we invest, and then we send them to those other programs where they can get some additional leadership training from third parties. And the reason we like that, there's a little bit, I call it the cool aunt or cool uncle effect, where they go there and they're like, oh, Todd, you wouldn't believe it. They talked about this. They talked about that. Like, yeah, that's great. Those are the things we talk about. But, they hear it from that cool aunt or cool uncle, and it's like, it sticks a little bit better sometimes.
No doubt about it.
Yeah. Thank you, Todd. And thank you, Heather. Like, before we wrap up, I want to speak directly to folks who are on a board and they're ready to make a difference in their workplace. And number two, they don't necessarily know what to tackle first. So in previous episodes, we talked about an outline or an online tool, that ADVISA developed to help people who are looking to create cultural competitive advantage. And Heather, could you remind our listeners what that tool is and what it can do for them?
Absolutely. Sometimes the hardest step is the first step. So we recognized if we had something short and simple that people could take 5 minutes, answer 25 questions, that all map back to those 5 important drivers for doing all the things that Todd has done in his organization. It's called Atlas Navigator because the information helps you navigate next conversations. It helps you understand your strengths and your weaknesses. So on our website, there's a big red button. It says Culture Check. And for anybody who really wants to dig in a little bit and hold up a mirror and self-assess, I highly recommend. Our website is advisa.com, and that culture check is right there on the homepage.
Awesome. Thank you, Heather. So 5-minute culture check, big button on the homepage, get your insights and let us know if you have any questions talking to Heather, myself, or anyone on the team. So this has been a great episode, Todd, just unpacking like what you've done, particularly lingering around leader effectiveness, which we appreciate and is got us into like our third piece of the Atlas framework. So a huge thank you, Todd, for taking time out, preparing and joining us today to share your insights, particularly that Genesis story of how this all came to be at your organization.
Thank you guys. Really appreciate the work you do to keep advancing culture.
Reflecting on what you were sharing, Todd, this is a great commercial for your organization. We're unpacking it from the standpoint of what can other people learn about how to build effective, engaging work cultures. But for anybody who's looking for a great place to work where you are, I would be remiss not to say, why would you not want to join an organization that lives out their values, that invests in development, and that even has a box on the org chart for Chief People Officer. So well done. Really inspiring to listen to you share your story.
Thank you so much.
So that being said, if they want to connect with you or learn more about Haverkamp, what's the best way for them to reach out?
Yeah, there's 2 ways. One, they could simply email me. It's Todd, and that's with 2 D's, and then it's Haverkamp, HAVERKAMP, and then a dash, and then the word properties.com. Or you could just simply go on to LinkedIn. There's only one of me out there. So you can just type in my name, Todd, and the last name is spelled Wuestenberg.
All right. Awesome. It's Wuestenberg.
Yes.
It's Wuestenberg. So that will be on the Todd test down the road. Okay, folks. So now you can keep up with Todd and the great work that he's doing at Haverkamp Properties. And Todd, once again, thank you for being here today. And until next time, I'm BJ McKay.
I'm Heather Haas.
In culture
starts here.
That's a wrap on this episode of the official CultureCon podcast.
If you got something out of it, share it with a friend, a teammate, or a fellow culture geek.
And don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode.
And if you want more ways to stay connected and inspired, check out our upcoming events page for a full listing of webinars, workshops, and conferences.
You'll find the link in the show notes, and we'd love to welcome you to a CultureCon event soon.
Until next time,